Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn, Navigating the FDA Maze, Unlocking the Secrets to Approval. I'm thrilled to have with us Jim Sergi, President and founder of Qnova Life Sciences. Jim brings decades of experience guiding pharmaceutical and medical device companies through the complex regulatory landscape. With more than 85 successful NDA and BLA approvals and over 250 medical device approvals to his credit. Today, he'll share how early-stage companies can avoid common pitfalls, define clear goals, and build a winning strategy to accelerate development from discovery to commercialization. Please join me in welcoming Jim Sergi.
Well, thank you, Ravi, and thank you for the Innosphere for inviting me to present at this Lunch and Learn. What I thought I would do is I prepared a few slides to review with you today, but I'd really like to then open it up for discussion through the chat room. So as you have questions, please put them in the chat box. I'll monitor that box, and we will. I'll try my best to answer your questions. So if we could get started with the first slide, Robbie, that would be appreciated. So this is just a little bit about who and what we are. We are a global regulatory consulting group. We not only work to support US-based companies with the FDA, but we also support a large number of foreign entities who want to either enter the US, or we work with our US clients to ensure that their regulatory program is harmonized for the invest countries in which they want to seek market authorization through a competent health authority. The company is based in Baltimore, Maryland. We also have an office that we opened in 2023 in Seoul, Korea, to support our business development efforts in the APEC community there. Within life sciences, we do have a broad therapeutic indication experience. We've worked on over 20 different therapeutic indications, with drugs and biologics. And we also have deep knowledge of the Center for Veterinary Medicine and in harmonizing a drug program for dual use applicability into veterinary sciences. And we, and this slide just illustrates some of our track record, which I like to point to the fact that we have a 95% 10-year client retention rate. We will be announcing later this year during the JP Morgan program, our accelerator program that we're launching to support early stage companies with investors. And we are in the process of closing on Fund 1 as well as Fund 2 that we hope to have closed by the end of the year. Next slide, Robbie. So when you are developing a novel therapeutic, whether it's a novel therapeutic, a biosimilar, a 505(b)(2), it's really important to establish a strategic roadmap because the strategic roadmap needs to also align with your investment thesis. And what's really important is to really have a clear understanding of your regulatory framework for your drug discovery and development program. So it then doesn't become an intellectual exercise. You want to ensure that your project plan and your budget are aligned with investor KPIs and the stage of investment that you are seeking. It's also important to really understand a priori what your goals and objectives are. Is your goal to develop your drug out through first in man, or is your goal to advance it all the way out through NDA or BLA approval? Because the steps that you undertake during your preclinical program, your safety toxin, your CMC program will vary dramatically. So it's important to really understand what your goals are and where you're seeking either to exit the company to a strategic or if you're planning to take it all the way through. It's also important to really understand what the desired product attributes are and how you can clearly differentiate your product from the competitors. And it's important to really understand that because you can really begin to differentiate your product through your preclinical analytic program, your safety toxicology program, and to really then permit yourself as you enter first in human clinical trials to have a clear understanding of how you're different compared to the competitive landscape. And unlike a device which has a relatively shorter time frame to FDA approval, with a drug, you're typically looking at a development pathway that can range anywhere from 3 to 10 years. So it's important to really look at the time horizon as to when you would anticipate FDA approval for your competitive landscape and the claims that you want to make. It's also important to really understand early on how you intend to develop your product along its life cycle. So you hear frequently the term dual use technology. In some cases, dual use may be civilian military or human animal. So how can you really develop out the life cycle of your product from maybe from an IV formulation to an oral tablet formulation as you advance forward? And then can you continue to add shareholder value through building out your IP fortress and confirm that you do have freedom to operate? And it's also really important to really understand what are the issues for the stakeholders that are going to purchase the product. So, unlike other countries where we have a single payer system, here in the US, we have hundreds of payers that will have a stake in your product. And it's important to understand early how those stakeholders are going to value your product and what types of data will they want to see in order to provide value pricing, to your product. And it's also important to understand how physicians and the user of your product will value it and how they see your product being integrated into a standard of care. It's also important as you develop your product to understand where your product may be marketed. Are you going to initially develop your product for the US market? And are you looking to commercialize your product eventually in other countries? And if so, how can you harmonize your development program to meet the requirements of other competent health authorities in those invest markets in order to avoid repeating either analytic studies or your safety toxicology studies that can be very expensive? So it starts at the end by reverse engineering your program and advancing it forward. Next slide. Next slide. So what's important with a company developing a drug or a biologic is to really understand what the FDA guidance is and requirements are. And so it's important for you to really build a case for the FDA that in turn will support your investment thesis, because your regulatory program needs to carefully align with your investor thesis. It's important for you to really understand the FDA guidances for the product that you're developing. The FDA is not a consultant to you. So it's important to first understand, are you going to be regulated by CDER or CBER? CBER is the center that regulates biologics, and CDER regulates drugs. And it's also important to understand the requirements to support your indication for use, and the basis for that. Next slide. So the FDA, as I stated previously, is not your consultant, but the FDA is a very transparent organization. They are open and they're committed to helping US and foreign companies succeed. Everybody plays by the same rules at the FDA. I had a client approach us yesterday following a pre-submission meeting, a pre-IND meeting, wanting to know if they could contact their congressman and if their congressman could help accelerate the program. And the answer is no. Um, they're really not going to help you. Everybody plays by the same rules, and the goal of the FDA is to ensure patient safety. FDA speak, however, is unique, but it's not foreign. So when you're communicating with the FDA, it's important for you to clearly understand the guidances that they are explaining, that they are providing to you in their written feedback. Unlike a medical device where you have many different pathways that one could go down with a medical device, with a therapeutic, the regulatory pathway is fairly well defined for companies, whether you're developing a drug or a biologic. So it's important for you to really understand those guidances and the pathways that have been outlined for manufacturers of drugs. The other thing to consider is that the timing for meetings and activities with the FDA are predictable and they're mandated by Congress. Even though there's been over 1,000 individuals cut or on furlough at the FDA continues to meet all of their PDUFA dates as set by Congress. That may change in the future, but it's important to understand that the timing for a review of a pre-IND meeting has been set at 75 days, and the FDA is currently meeting those timelines. The PDUFA fees that one ultimately submits to the FDA for an NDA submission or a BLA application are also published and mandated by Congress, and those PDUFA fees have been increasing approximately 5% annually, and there's the sense that there may be a greater increase in 2027. Also, what companies are not often aware of is the FDA has funding available for companies that are developing products that have been designated as an orphan or a pediatric rare disease entity. So funding is available through the FDA's Office of Orphan and Pediatric Rare Diseases. And last year, the rate or the approval rate for first-time applications seeking funding through this office was approximately 45%, which is significantly higher than the NIH SBIR office. So one of the questions that came in through the chat window was whether or not I could provide an example of how the regulatory roadmap will differ based on the exit strategy. One example that I can share with you is a product that we're working on right now for a novel pain product. And it's a novel opioid product that we are developing through the FDA. And it will be entering its first-in-man clinical studies. During the FDA meeting, we asked the FDA if some of the analytic studies that are required that really characterize how the product binds is metabolized, is excreted intracellularly, could be waived and completed concurrent with phase 2 or phase 3 studies. But prior to approval of the product. And we were able to obtain a waiver from the FDA to delay those studies until after the completion of the first in human studies. Similarly, we were able to obtain waivers for various quality attributes of the product during the CMC testing. What that means to the client is it saves the client in excess of a year development time, as well as in excess of $3 million prior to entering first in man clinical. So it's important to really understand the guidances, what to ask and when to ask if your plan is to exit early. The other thing, getting back to this slide, is to understand that the meetings and the communications that you have with the FDA are formal. By calling the 1-800 number that is provided by the FDA and chatting to an FDA representative does not convey formal communications from the FDA. Only FDA communications that result from a formal type B, C, D, or A meeting are formal communications back from the agency. Next slide. So, what are some of the changes going on, at the FDA? We've all seen the press releases that have come out from the FDA, from other offices, but what is really going on, at the FDA? The press releases that have come out from the FDA are press releases and they're not guidances. So that's important to really understand. There have been funding cuts, at HHS and the FDA. There's been over 1,000 individuals that have either resigned or have been let go from the agency. A lot of those cuts have been in the division of CDRH, but there has been considerable leadership changes, at the FDA, even leadership changes reported this week with the director of CDER resigning. What that means is that there's been a brain drain, at the FDA, and there's been an extensive amount of institutional knowledge that has been lost, at the agency. And so what we have been seeing and advising clients is to communicate with the FDA as early as possible with your initial pre-submission meeting. You don't need to have your animal safety data in place. If you feel that you're eligible for an Interact meeting, schedule an Interact meeting as quickly as possible so that you do have formal written communication as a basis of guidance going forward. And this is something that we're seeing investors want as well. Investors are asking, what does the FDA say because of the uncertainty? We've also found that in our communications with the FDA, that when we submit a pre-submission meeting request or another type meeting request, that we're having to really provide a lot of historical guidance and background to the agency to support the question that we are asking. So that's been one change that we have seen, and I guess advice that we would provide to companies. We have not seen any significant delays in the PDUFA meeting dates that have been set. However, what we have seen is that most all meetings with CDER or CBER are virtual or written feedback only. The FDA has issued a press release or guidance through their office indicating that future follow-up or written communications or clarification from the agency following a meeting will be done in writing outside of the PDUFA date. So that's something to keep in mind. But we have not seen, as of this week, any delays. There's been a lot of guidances that have come out from the agency that seems to be highly aligned with the current political administration. What this means going forward, whether you're developing a vaccine, a food supplement, is really unclear at this point, but we've seen no implications or impact on any of our clients that are developing novel vaccines. They have, however, eliminated or placed on hold a lot of the advisory committees that are used to provide guidance to the FDA for decision making. So the FDA had 32 special advisory committees that provided guidance to the FDA to support the FDA in making decisions for a basis of approval. With those committees on hold or disbanded, it's unclear how decisions will be reached. Um, the FDA also recently invested almost $1 billion in integrating in AI tools to help guide the FDA in decision making, and that is known as ELSA. There's been a lot of disenchantment with ELSA, both at the FDA as well as with sponsors, including us. And it's really unclear, how the FDA is going to proceed in using ELSA. We have had some companies that have used ELSA for submissions with devices. Those submissions have not been able to go through the eStar portal for devices. But we at Kinova Life Sciences have integrated AI into our daily workflow as we support our clients in advancing their submission documents through the FDA, and we've been able to use it in a very time and cost-effective manner for our clients. I think one of the changes that we've seen is they've eliminated the pediatric rare disease priority review voucher. The voucher program remains in effect for tropical and rare diseases, but what they've done instead is they've created the Commissioner's National Priority Review Voucher Program. It's being piloted right now. They've already issued one voucher to companies, and we're working with one of our clients to submit a voucher within by the end of the month for this program. It's a 300-word abstract, basically, that you submit submit to the FDA to determine their interest to accept your program as part of that voucher. These vouchers are not transferable, unlike the PRVs, which were regarded as the lottery. The FDA has also come out and issued a lot of information and press releases about eliminating the need or looking at alternatives for animal testing, and a big push on using AI and 3D cell culture or organoid models to eliminate the need for animal safety testing. Through all of our pre-IND meeting submissions and all of our interactions with the FDA at the leadership level, there's been no change in those requirements to date. It doesn't mean that there won't be changes in the future, but at this point, there's been no change there. One of the areas of concern, however, has been on API. There's been a lot of issues that we have seen originating out of China as well as India. And the FDA is requiring manufacturers to really have in place very solid supply and quality agreements from your suppliers of your API as well as your drug product, and for sponsors to validate. So C of A's coming out of some of these countries and some of these labs are not worth the paper they're written on. So it's up to the sponsor to validate that work. With the big push in tariffs that we've seen, costs have risen, for goods and supplies. Glassware has increased because a lot of glassware comes out of Mexico. So that has really affected pricing. There has been a big push from the current administration for US GMP production of drugs. There's been some companies publicly announcing plans, but it's 5 to 7 years away before we will see a material difference in the US GMP self-reliance on manufacturing. One of the questions is, will they be honoring existing PRVs? My understanding is that if a PRV has been issued, for a company just not qualified, that yes, that those PRVs will continue to be issued. Next slide. Next slide. So this slide just illustrates, which many of you in the drug discovery development ecosystem clearly understands. And I only show this slide to really identify for you what we see as some of the value inflection points for developing a drug. And if you have a product, it's important for you as you begin to develop your product to really understand the life cycle management of that product. We like to really look at, a product to determine, does it meet an unmet medical need for an orphan population? And that's really important because by developing a product in an orphan indication, your pathway for approval can be accelerated and your costs significantly reduced. And investors understand that. And they look for that as a positive. It also permits you to obtain an early read on your science, because the FDA is reviewing your application and they're able to provide you with guidance that provides investor confidence. The other significant investment milestone for an early stage company is having that pre-IND meeting and filing your IND, permitting you to go first in man. And typically that is where the greatest inflection comes for an early stage company. So because of that, some companies are looking to go offshore for their first in man clinicals, where you do not need to have a complete safety and CMC package in place. So countries such as Australia, South Africa, Taiwan have been countries where a number of companies have sought to conduct their first in man studies and then to bring the studies back. What's important to note is it does not negate the safety toxicology studies in animals that the FDA requires. We see that frequently from companies that are either inbound from other countries or US-based countries that'll go to Australia or some other country, and they want to believe that human data will trump animal safety data, and we've yet to see that. Next slide. So this slide just really illustrates some of the regulatory bodies that, or the quality bodies that regulate drugs. When you're developing a drug, it's important that to understand as you develop your analytic program, those studies that need to be done under GLP conditions versus non-GLP. And that's important because not everything needs to be done under GLP conditions. So you're able to save, costs there. But there are different divisions that will regulate your product, whether you're a drug, a biologic, or a vaccine. Next slide. So this slide just addresses good manufacturing practices, and not all studies, as I just stated, need to be GLP, but your quality management program for your drug manufacturing needs to scale with the stage of development that your product is in. So as you go through the various stages of clinical development, your quality program needs to scale accordingly. So that's why it's important when you're negotiating with your manufacturer for your drug product, do they have the ability and the experience, to manufacture your drug for release control to meet, phase 2 or phase 3 or commercial standards? And it's important to really understand that and to have your supply and quality agreements aligned accordingly. And what GMP really refers to is, the purity, the potency, stability, and the consistency and manufacturing controls of your product for the stage of release that you are testing your product in. Next slide. Your US FDA IND pivotal toxicology studies are really critical consideration, and it's often important to discuss in your pre-IND program your plans for your IND enabling toxicology studies. Typically, the FDA requires 2 animal species, 1 rodent, 1 large animal. The FDA is not going to define for you those animal species. However, it's important for you to understand what has been done previously, what has been accepted by the agency. And if you're going to deviate from what is acceptable, say from a beagle to a mini pig, that you have justification for that animal model for both for the indication and dose that you intend to use. So with your IND enabling studies, it's really important as you design your experiments to identify your target organ where you're likely to see pathology or toxicity, and to identify predictive safety biomarkers that can transfer to human testing later. It's also important for you to assess the local tolerance and to determine that there are no observed adverse effects and at the exposed ratios that you intend to go into human. Your dose and route of administration must support your first in human indication. So that's critical, and that's usually accounts for 30% of delays from the FDA with the IND submission, where the dose and the route did not support the dose or the route of administration in humans. Next slide. Your enabling toxicology needs to include endpoints that are relevant to the molecular class, your anticipated toxicity, as well as the anticipated pharmacodynamic effect. It is possible to only use 1 animal species, a large animal species, if you are developing a biologic such as a gene-based therapy or a cell-based therapy. So that's something that you can negotiate with the FDA, and the FDA has shown great flexibility in waiving the 2 animal species rule. Typically, your toxicology studies in animals are 14 to 28 days with a repeat dose to support your SAD and your MAD studies that you're going to use in humans. If you're planning to dose longer than 28 days, then your toxicology studies in your animals need to align accordingly. Your primary endpoints are clinical and anatomic pathologic assessments that need to be consistent with your planned indication for use. And these studies are always done under GLP. Next slide. And this slide just further really illustrates some of the consideration for your safety toxicology studies. And it's really up to you as the drug developer to really determine and rationalize with the FDA why you are selecting the species that you are developing. Next slide. This slide illustrates the objectives for a pre-IND meeting, which is often the first interaction or formal communication that a company has with the FDA for developing a new drug or a biologic. Our recommendation is to get in front of the FDA as soon as possible because you want to ensure that the FDA is in agreement with your development program for your analytic, your safety toxicology, and your CMC. And these are very expensive programs to develop, so you want to ensure that you have alignment with the FDA. Your objectives for that pre-IND meeting are to really identify potential gaps in your analytic studies and your characterization of your molecule, and to really critically review your CMC considerations and to define with the FDA their expectations as to when they want to see those studies or the quality analytic studies completed prior to going into first in man. So it's possible to negotiate with the FDA to have those studies completed later.
Good.
During the pre-IND meeting, the FDA typically will not review your clinical development plan. They'll want to understand your first-in-man clinical studies, how you're planning to enter the clinic, but they will not review and comment on your protocol at that time. It's a formal meeting request. You're permitted to ask a total of 10 questions of the agency, and you can have various subparts of that. The information that comes back from the FDA is formal and it's often binding. So you want to ensure that you ask the right questions. Next slide. So your request for submitting a meeting is always made in writing. It's made through the FDA portal, and it's submitted as an electronic document using ECTD publishing software. The meeting request is available online at the FDA, so you can go online and pull down a typical, package, if you would, or the template, but you're going to provide a product description, a description of your proposed clinical indication, and your plan for developing your product. You'll identify the purpose of the meeting, the objectives, and the draft specific questions that you want to ask. You'll also include the suggested dates for your meeting and the format of the meeting. Do you want to receive written feedback only? Do you want a virtual meeting? We have not had any in-person meetings since COVID, with the exception of those products that we are developing currently that are medical defense countermeasures, where they've been conducted at either the FDA or Walter Reed under security. The FDA will respond back within 14 days of receipt. What's important with a pre-IND meeting request is that you are not required to submit your briefing package that is used to support your questions at the time of the meeting request. However, your briefing package is required to be submitted within 30 days of the scheduled meeting. Failure to do so will result in cancellation of your meeting. It also typically requires 3 to 5 days to publish your briefing package and to submit it through the FDA portal. If you do not have an FDA portal submitted and you're planning to submit yourself, what we're seeing is it's taking approximately 6 to 8+ weeks for companies to set up and to validate their FDA portal. So our suggestion would be to work with a group such as Qnova or others that have a portal and is able to publish and submit your pre-IND meeting request. Next slide. So with the FDA filing, it is submitted through the ECTD format. The FDA will send a letter acknowledging your package and provide you with an IND number, and then 30 days prior you submit your briefing package. The meeting itself will take place within approximately 75 business days of submission. And one of the questions that we frequently get asked is, what is the difference between a physician-initiated IND versus a corporate? Most all of the INDs, or I would say all of the INDs we submit are corporate INDs by the sponsor, which has a much higher standard with the FDA. For a physician-initiated IND, it's typically an IND that is a single institution sponsored study in which the local institution's IRB assumes responsibility for the conduct and risk associated with that study. Most large tertiary centers that we work with are not willing to assume that risk for a physician-initiated IND. Next slide. One of the questions is regarding the pre-IND meeting and the FDA not commenting on clinical design. The key value is for the FDA to de-risk their clinical design. Well, they won't review the protocol itself during a pre-IND meeting. They will review your clinical development plan. And you can de-risk your clinical development program by asking the right questions around your development plan, but also ensuring that your clinical safety toxicology program aligns with your first-in-man human clinical study. So a lot can be obtained during the pre-IND meeting request and how you ask the questions and you design your safety toxicology program to support your first-in-man safety study. Some of the common problems that we have encountered when having a pre-IND meeting is inadequate CMC information and insufficient preclinical support for the program itself, as well as proposing, when you submit your IND, an unaccepted clinical trial design itself. It's also important to really understand what studies need to be GCP compliant versus those that do not. Because you don't want to submit your IND with insufficient evidence of data that was not done under GCP standards. The other area is the animal safety does not support the indication for use either in dose, route, or duration. And it's also really failure to follow or failure to understand the FDA guidances for your product. What we found is that picking a fight with the FDA or arguing with the FDA, it's never a win. You're never going to win that battle. So we always tell clients you never want to draw blood because the sharks were circled. Next slide. Next slide. So with that, I'll stop. Happy to answer any questions either in chat or live. And I also want to encourage you and to invite you to attend the Qnova Life Science Partnering Forum that we host during JP Morgan. This will be our 12th year that we're hosting the program. It is a free program. It is being held January 12th through 15th. It is both in person as well as virtual, and you can learn more about the program at our website. Last year, we hosted over 1,500 companies. MTech, which is the DoD BioVenture arm, is our sponsor, as well as the NIH and the DOW as our sponsor this year for the meeting. It's a great networking opportunity for you to attend and network with investors, and showcase your research discovery and really learn more about what investors are looking for, as well as strategics, and to just obtain a lot of information. We are hosting plenary discussions with some of the leading industry experts in the morning, both from the financial as well as the pharma perspective. So to give you a chance to meet some of these industry experts. And then last year, we had over 30 different government trade organizations participate in our program. And so it's an opportunity to meet different government trade organizations if you're considering to develop or to market your program outside of the USA. It's also an opportunity for you to meet with the NIH leadership and talk about SBIR funding, and to learn more about new programs, both intramural programs and extramural programs that both MTech as well as the NIH and the DOW are planning to launch this coming year. The Inosphere has been a partner of ours for almost 10 years with JP Morgan. Ben and his team have attended, as have other members of the CSU leadership. So I strongly encourage you to attend this program, and it is a free program. And we still have some hotel rooms available at a discount. You can follow up with me afterwards, and we can get you the link to the rooming block. We will be hosting a reception on Sunday evening at the hotel, sponsored by what was Silicon Valley Bank and is now Stifel. So with that, I'll stop, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So on Jim's comment about attending JP Morgan, if you want to meet a lot of people in a very short amount of time, the partnering room is a good place to go that Jim does host.
And this year we have partnered with BioBuzz. They're a Maryland-based company, and they are conducting podcasts leading up to the event with our clients and our sponsors, and they will be on site conducting live podcasts of the event and companies attending the program. So we're really excited about the program this year, and I think finally I was able, Ben, to double our room size.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. One of the questions in the chat room is our dosing will be chronic. It's your understanding that we'll need 2 6-month chronic trials, small molecule oral daily dose. Is that correct? It's partially correct, yes. With chronic dosing like that, the FDA is gonna want you to go out. However, for your first in MAD, your SAD MAD study, one of the considerations would be to do an acute initial dose while you continue to run your chronic dose so you can get into humans sooner. So there's a lot of ways in which you can strategize around that. You keep your chronic dose study going to support your eventual indication, but your goal is to get your drug into man as soon as possible for investors.
So thank you, Jim. That was my question. I was planning, my understanding is I plan on the traditional 14 or 28 day rodent, non-rodent, and then I would do the chronic study before. I would have to complete that before I could do any type of long-term study, but
Correct.
I could do the first in man, MAD and SAD, without even starting the longer term, because that's going to be 1.5 million to run those chronic studies, right? So trying to figure out how much money do I need to raise, to get first in man, trying to keep my IND enabling
Yeah.
cost in control.
One of the strategies and one of the things that we've done with clients is to run those studies in parallel because it's going to save money if you can run them in parallel and just, continue the studies out. You're
Right.
purchasing animals once, et cetera.
Right.
And to see if you can get a waiver from the agency for just single species, long-term chronic dose. But those studies can be run, and we've run those long-term chronic dose studies even out a year while you're starting your phase 2 study. So there's a lot of strategies and a lot of flexibility that you have there.
So thank you. You'd answered another of my earlier questions, which was how does the exit strategy impact the regulatory strategy? My thinking was you're going to have to do the regulatory regardless if somebody's going to buy you or not, or you're going to go all the way. And I got the sense from your answer that there may be studies that I'm planning for my IND that I don't need to run.
Correct.
And so there's CMC studies and there's IND study. There's safety
Yep.
and tox work and CMC work I may not have to do to get to first in man.
Correct.
And which categories those fall into?
It's product specific. We would need to really look at your program there.
Okay.
So without, it would be impossible for me to answer that question without more information. But, with the example I just cited with this company, we were able to waive an extensive amount of the preclinical analytic work. We were not able to waive the safety tox, the 2 animals tox. But on the CMC, you're always able to, you're going to scale your CMC for the phase of development of your program. And if you're looking to exit after phase 2, you want to ensure that your supply and your quality agreements are aligned that permit you to do a tech transfer.
Okay.
And to really understand and to build in your, the systems and the processes in your CMC that will permit you to seamlessly transfer, because a strategic that's looking to acquire an asset after phase 2, part of their decision goes into manufacturing. How long is it going to take me to do a tech transfer? What's the cost? What's the requirements? And then assuming we go through phase 3 successfully, what's the scale-up manufacturing going to look like? So there's a lot of thought that a strategic puts into that before they're going to license or bring in a product around CMC. That's really critical.
Okay. Thank you.
Jim, could I ask a question on bringing a pharmaceutical that has been approved for use in other countries and get that FDA approved in the United States?
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit to that process and how the FDA may recognize some trials that have been successful in other countries, to maybe potentially expedite their view?
Sure. I'll be happy to. And we just had an IND meeting this week for a client that has completed, they have multiple phase 3 studies in Russia and Eastern Europe. There's been over 1 million patients, real world patient exposure to the product, and they now want to enter the US there. In this situation, the safety toxicology studies that were done were not done under GLP standards. They were done under other standards within that country, but not GLP. So typically what the FDA has done, and we see this a lot with companies coming in from the APAC as well as Eastern Europe, and it's going to vary by client, but the FDA does want to see animal safety toxicology studies that were done under GLP. They want that and they require that. A lot of the analytic stuff you can get pushed aside. Depending upon the clinical studies, if those clinical studies were done under ICH, good clinical practice, GCP, ICH standards, then a lot of that information will be accepted. However, what the agency has mandated, and this came about under the last administration, and it hasn't been tested since, that they want real world US patient exposure, to a drug. So there was a situation where a company from China had a drug, it was approved in China, they wanted to bring it into the US, and would the US accept all of that data? And the US came back, they had a meeting, a scientific advisory board meeting, and the FDA came back and said no. So the FDA does want, and what you have to do is negotiate. And so this is where there's a lot of horse trading. And so your first interaction with the agency would be a pre-IND meeting because you haven't opened an IND. So you would have an IND meeting. Your IND package would be quite large, and the IND package we submitted for this client was, it was it was very large. They did not review, all of we did not submit the clinical protocols, but we summarized it. And, we were able to negotiate quite a bit, with the agency. But the FDA has never to date accepted a product for approval based solely on foreign data. Animal safety talks, if it's done under GLP, yes. A lot of animal safety talks, we use a group in Korea almost extensively for safety talks. Safety talks, as long as it's GLP and supports your IFU, that's fine. But it's really the clinical where they want, real world US exposure.
Very helpful. Thank you.
But how much is really, up to negotiation with the agency. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jim, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You talked early, right when you started, about this. You've worked with Center for Veterinary Medicine. I'm specifically doing my studies under INAD, and it's specifically for minor species, wild birds. So I'm wondering if you have any experience in that. It's kind of a niche realm, and if not, do you know of any others? And
You don't have any experience in birds, so I can't address that specifically. What CVM requires is that they will, they require a single species study for the species in which you are seeking your indication for use. So if you are developing a drug, and if your large animal study is being conducted in beagles, and you can harmonize that study for the dose and route of administration that you would use in canines, then you can harmonize the program. So that's an example that we have used.
Yeah, it's a little bit, I mean, wild birds, anything can get in. You can't restrict a specific wild bird. So that's our issue. But we've been working with them under INAD. It's just it's all pre, it's not the actual one. So I'm just wondering how to deal with that. But
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions I can answer?
One more real quick. Is it helpful to this process to partner with, say, a reputable university to go through this process? I'm just curious how, kind of partnering can help with success.
We work with, a lot of universities on drug discovery, and development for, a lot of products. What's really, and that it's great, to work with universities, and they're invaluable. What's important is as you begin to advance your drug product from discovery to enter what I call, the pre-IND, or you're developing your IND enabling. It's really important, and investors insist that you remain focused in working with groups that really understand how to advance a drug forward under GLP conditions. And there's not a lot. CSU is unique in that they do have GLP capabilities through Jeremiah's lab over there, and there may be other groups that I'm not aware of. But it's quite unusual for universities to provide GLP and to provide those services in a timely manner, unlike a CRO where that's all they do. So it's always a trade-off.
Thank you. Very helpful too.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for your time. Any questions, please follow up with me. Happy to answer your questions. Any comments, feedback, share it. It only makes us better. And I hope you consider attending our JP Morgan program in January.